fork and knife and everyone's kind of looking at me a weird way. Moments even as simple as those, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where you just,
Yes.
yeah. It's interesting to me, to observe that in myself. I obviously, when I was a little kid, I didn't have any idea why I felt different. I mean, I knew I was, but my parents tried so hard to say, no, you are a regular, that I just thought, okay, well, I'm a regular whatever, except that I don't feel like this and I don't feel like that. I don't feel at
Right.
home. I don't. So I find that I still feel awkward and kind of left out. And it makes me wonder, I never had children, but if I had had them, I wonder how they would have felt. Would they have picked up some of that awkwardness from me or not? Are you, what do you think?
I feel like it might depend on how strongly you embrace your culture, and this is jumping back to what I previously stated about how I'm so deeply rooted in my Polish traditions. It's what I was raised in. It's all I know. So when I act on my Polish, just general, morals and
Polishness.
values, my
Right.
Polishness, and it not oftentimes, sometimes that's not how Americans do it,
Yeah.
and those are the moments where I feel like I stand out. But if you don't embrace your culture as much, or if you're not familiar with it as much, then you can lose that. Yeah.
So the big assimilation question is, though, let's say you, at some point here in the future, you decide, I'm going to have kids, I'm going to start a family. What are you going to teach them?
Well, they're gonna go to Polish school.
Ah.
They're gonna do their Polish reading and
Yeah.
their writing, and they're gonna absolutely embrace the language as much as I can. Unfortunately, I'm losing it a little bit
Yeah.
too, since I don't get to use it as often, and it does just go away a bit. But no, they're gonna know the language, and they're gonna know the traditions and values, and hopefully my parents will help in making sure that they understand where they come from.
But to not devil's advocate, but on the assimilationists advocate, you're perpetuating the lack of assimilation here. You're not letting them become full Americans or whatever that thing is. I mean, is that it hasn't been a problem for you? I mean, it's a little weird every now and then, but it hasn't been something where you're like, gosh, I just feel like I'm not a part of this. You are gifting them with that if you do it this way, right?
Right. And they're going to pick up the American culture from other places.
Yeah.
When I'm not at home, I am in American culture and in my student life, my social life.
Right.
That's all within those realms. So they're going to pick it up from other places, that's no doubt, since it's kind of
Yeah.
hard not to when you're living in America, but
Yeah.
it's a lot harder to know something that you're so far away removed from.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully I'll be able to kind of hand them a little bit of knowledge on their Polish heritage.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think that's good. I think that's admirable that you want to do this. I'm not arguing against it. I'm just thinking about it in the terms of people who talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, when you come here, you should just, as if you can somehow just, disconnect the straps or something
Yeah.
and leave your past behind. There is no past, and you're suddenly just a blank slate. You come here and you absorb all the stuff. That isn't how it works, and I don't think that's how it works for anybody. I think a lot of people who imagine themselves as being, I'm 100% American, kind of thinking, have their own connections to their various pasts, immigrant pasts. That's just as much a part of them, and like you were saying, that's the melting pot idea, is
Yeah.
that they just think of that, oh, that's American, but it really isn't. A lot of the holidays, a lot of the little celebrations, a lot of the little customs and things like that are still,
Yeah.
they've been co-opted to a great extent, but they didn't originate
Absolutely.
here, And so I don't see a problem with that myself. I don't see that as a problem. But there are people that certainly will argue with you about that, I think.
I
to a
very
great
well know.
extent.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever argued with you? Tried to talk you out of, like, you should really not do that.
More of a devil's advocate kind of situations as well.
Okay.
There's a general, at least within, the U of I community, within fellow students,
Yeah.
they want to push diversity so hard, and they're promoting diversity so hard. So no one's ever going to bash you on embracing your culture.
Right.
That's their selling point on their pamphlets and their brochures.
Yeah.
But there have been discussions within, political science classes that I've taken about assimilation and immigrants, absolutely. And there's been arguments that have come up from there.
That's interesting. I haven't, in a way, I almost wish I could peek in at those things and listen to see what people are saying. Because I get a lot from the news. I read news and I hear people talk. But those are the professional talkers. I'm more interested to hear what just how regular people think of describing things like that.
Right.
And because you get a sense of what they're thinking from that. And I think it's very interesting. Immigration is generally discussed as this sort of one size fits all. Like immigrants
Absolutely.
are
Yeah.
all like this, and they're coming here. It's strange but there's so many different reasons why people would pick up and just go somewhere else or come here. Let's say, since we're here, we're talking about immigration from this perspective. There are a lot of reasons that people come here. Some of them make sense, some don't. Some people have been sold the American dream to the point where they just think it's real and that I can do anything in America, Like, no, you probably can't, but you can sure try if you want to. And if you're lucky, maybe something will work out. But I lost my point. I was going somewhere, and then I just took a turn, and I don't know where I am. But yeah, it's the point of the show a lot of the time is to try to humanize immigration and immigrants, and get people thinking in terms of people moving from place to place, and why do people do that? Why would someone want to do that? What could be wrong with somebody doing that? I have yet to personally. Did you come by the table at Quad Day, or how did you find us? Were you just from your class?
Yes, I was seeking an internship experience for this semester, and
okay.
I spoke with Professor Hanahan, who runs the political science internship program, and she kind of threw out a couple options, and I was interested in your cause, and here I am. So.
Okay, yeah. I asked because I've had some odd and sort of interesting conversations on Quad Day, because I go there every year, and I sit out there at my table and sweat and talk to people about what we do. And I've had more than one person say, what, so you're advocating open borders? Is that your idea? And it's like, well, not really, but at the same time, I don't see that as a horrible thing. I see that as problematic in some ways, because, if you don't have any pay attention to, who's going where and what they're doing, who knows what's going to happen. So it does make sense to have some order to how one comes to this country. But beyond that, I don't see any reason why it has to be restrictive. It should just be orderly in some way. There should be some process that you go through to judge. I don't know whether you're a decent person or like a raving lunatic, or if you are a revolutionary of some sort, who I'm coming here to bomb the country. Well, okay, maybe not you,
Yeah.
But yeah, in a way, I don't see anything really wrong with the idea of open borders. If there were no borders at all in the world, what's the worst that would happen? People would travel around. Borders are just artificial delineations. Okay, you're a little kid and you're sharing your room. This is my side of the room. That's your side of the room. You can't come over here. It's like a weird control freak issue. It doesn't mean anything,
I feel like a lot of times, and I've noticed this within discussions in classrooms, and we talked about earlier people bringing up the other side of assimilation. And I think often people kind of pinpoint really drastic scenarios and bring them out to the front stage, and they talk about terrorists and criminals and all of these bad things happening and totally forget to acknowledge the fact that most of the people coming here are not those people.
Yeah. Like so many more are not that it's not even, you know.
Right, right. So, to argue, closed borders or to argue assimilation because of such a small percent chance that someone's going to be a certain way, I think is a very closed-minded way of thinking about immigration.
Yeah, it seems like really like you're not really thinking about it. You're just
Right.
reacting to the idea of it. Because most people are good people.
Right.
Let's just get that on the table. Most people are good. Most people are selfish and short-sighted and inconsiderate in all sorts of ways. That is also true, but it's also true of all people, not
Right.
those
Absolutely.
people. Or we're not nicer than them. We just understand each other because we're used to each other. We don't understand them, so they seem weird. It's more like what you're used to and what you're kind of comfortable with than it is that difference is threatening in any way. That's the only reason that
Yeah.
difference is threatening, is that it's uncomfortable and it forces you to think differently about things.
Right.
And you don't want to do that.
It doesn't help also that the media oftentimes dramatizes, is that the word here? Dramatizes scenarios such as this. So if someone doesn't actively research the statistic or the information about immigrants and immigration, the only information they have is of these
Yeah,
really drastic situations
sure.
that occur. And that was one of the reasons why I started learning about immigration personally and why I wanted to become a part of your organization here, is because I was one of those people who didn't know much about it. And until I started looking into it and realizing that there's a completely different side of the story, I swear it just blows over people's heads sometimes.
And it's really funny to listen to you say that after spending the whole first half of the show talking about how your parents were immigrants. You could sit there with a straight face and say, I didn't know much about it.
Right.
You grew up with it. I mean, that was your life. That has been
Right.
your life, and it still is in some ways. So that's the thing that I was getting at earlier about how immigration is seen as a topic rather than the fact of just people moving. So here you have the daughter of immigrants
Yeah.
saying, I didn't know much about immigration. Who would know more about it than you,
It was truly never a topic that we discussed at home.
Right.
My parents didn't have any issues immigrating. They had sponsors. It wasn't a difficult process for them. And it's actually quite funny within the Polish community, which most of them are immigrants. There's actually quite large opposition to immigration. Which, yes, it is. It's interesting, but again, I think that really comes from the fact that they're hearing about scenarios that are very dramatized and drastic, and they stop thinking about their own background and they start thinking about, oh my God, we're just going to be overcome by criminals and terrorists and all these bad people.
That's very sad. It's not that surprising, but it is unfortunate. Because you've heard probably, this is a sort of a popular phrase that goes around in certain circles, where if you don't have a border, you don't have a nation. I suppose that's true to some extent. Why do you have to have a nation?
Right.
Why are we a nation? What makes us a nation? What makes us want to be one? For Canada, for example, how are we different enough from Canada that we have to have a border between the two and two completely different governments? And I don't think we are. So, if you're excluding ethnicity and race from the issue, because that seems to be the sticking point for a lot of people.
Right.
And that's why I chose Canada as an example. Canada looks a lot like the U.S. in terms of its ethnic mixture and everything, in terms of its culture, in terms of everything. It's very similar. So if you make that comparison, you go, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, in Canada and U.S., we could just be one big country, and it wouldn't be that big a deal. Now, if you get into Mexico, suddenly then people are like, oh, that's very different. Why is it different? Different language, even though Canada has a lot of French, and different ethnic mixture. that suddenly you see a difference and you
Right.
go, oh, that's really different. Whereas with Canada, it doesn't seem so different. So I really honestly think that most people that are against immigration are doing so on some sort of racial basis, whether they are conscious of it or not. Like, we don't want them coming here.
I would agree.
We're okay with people like us, but we don't want people like them. And which then gets to the question, who are they? Like, how are they different? Because in large parts of the United States, that used to be Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Like a huge part of California and Texas, all that stuff there, that was Mexico at one point. Before that, it was all Native America, Canada, all the way down, you know. So it's like it people changing what they call it suddenly changes what they think it
Yeah.
is, and which is the power of words, I guess. You give it a different name, and it becomes something different. I'm talking too much. You're just sitting here nodding.
No, I'm very much agreeing.
Yeah.
With everything you're saying.
It almost sounded like you said,
No,
I'm
you're
agreeing
like-
with
you're-
whatever you're saying.
No, with
Whatever.
everything. You're
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of wrapping everything together in a nice bow, and I'm like, yep.
Yeah, well,
Yep.
that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. We're nearing, not at the end yet, but we're getting in the vicinity of the end of the show. So is there anything that we have not touched on that you thought would be an interesting thing to talk about, or that you would like to get at?
Nothing in particular. I was kind of interested, and I think I might have to do a little bit more research on this, but I was kind of interested in how policy today is affecting an immigrant's ability to attend university. Do you know anything about that? Because
A little bit.
I know some universities just completely, some states in general just don't allow, especially if you're an illegal immigrant. It's just they don't even allow you to attempt. Some states are more lenient on it, but then they, oftentimes there are other challenges financially. Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, the problems seem to be two general areas. One is the documentation, like, are you a citizen? Here they don't ask that question, so it's a moot point as far as this university is concerned, but there are some places where they do, and then it becomes a problem. The other thing is financing, because like almost
Right.
every student anymore gets financial aid. If there is anybody that just walks in and just pays their way, I have never met them. I probably never would meet them because they wouldn't hang out with the likes of me, but you know what I mean. It's just almost everybody does. Maybe not so many foreign students. It could be that people coming from other countries are financing in different ways, but at least if you're living in this geographical area, you probably are getting student aid, and that's where the big problem lies,
Right.
because a lot of aid is not available to
Right.
undocumented people. So one of the big pushes that we've been doing along with the various student groups is working to get more grants and loans available to undocumented students. But it's a tough sell for some people.
So is the University of Illinois then a open university for illegal immigrants, we'll say?
You'll get a lot of pushback from people if you use the term illegal immigrants.
I apologize.
No, I'm just saying it's just so you know, if you're going to be doing work with immigration, you'll get a lot of people who will look askance at you for saying that. So you might want to start saying undocumented.
Undocumented.
Just
Got it.
for the sake of being careful, because it is a
Yeah,
troubling term.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
But yeah, this is open. They're fine. Like I said, they don't ask that question. So you can sign up. You can do everything. There are other problems that are more subtle that I think people aren't aware of. For example, driver's licenses, different kinds of things that are asked for, Social Security numbers, if somebody wants it. That's the problem with getting loans a lot of the time, is if you don't have a Social Security number, who are you? As far as like the government is concerned, you don't exist. You have to have some identifying number. I'll give you a little story that's slightly disconnected, but is similar. My friend from Japan that I think you met when we talked
Yes.
over at the
Yes.
University Y, She had a bank account here in the U.S. because she was visiting from time to time, so it was like convenient to just put money here and leave it and have it sit here. And then, but she only comes every now and then, you know. So letters would come from the bank, and it was like, well, I don't, you know, I know there's money in there. I don't need, so she wouldn't open them. And unfortunately, at some point, the bank started saying, you haven't come here and done anything long enough. If you don't respond in a certain period of time, we're just going to close the account and send the money to the state, because that's a law. You can't just leave it. Yeah. So they did. Here's where the problem comes from. She can't get it back. There is no way. The found money in Illinois, you know, the system which does that says, okay, if you want to claim lost property, you need a Social Security number. If you don't have one, you have to get one, or you have to do, you know, there were a number of things that you had to do to prove who you were, but you can't do that if you don't live here, if you're not from here. So it became, I mean, we actually worked on this for a long time and tried all sorts of different things, and there just was no way. It was like, well, you need a Social Security number, or you need a temporary Social Security number, which you can get if you file for taxes, but you can't file for taxes if you don't owe any money. So if you've never worked here and never been paid, there's no reason to file for taxes. So the only way to get a temp Social Security number is to have filed for taxes. If you haven't filed, you can't have that. You can't have a regular Social Security number. There is nothing that they accept as identification is possible to get for this person. Therefore, your money's just gone. There's no getting it back. And we tried writing letters and visiting offices and doing things. I mean, it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was like, seriously, there's no way to do this? And it was just impossible. So I bring that up as an illustration of how getting loans and doing things like that are actually very difficult for people who don't have those forms of identification. There are lots of things, contrary to what all these people would have you believe, that immigrants are just coming here without documentation going, ooh, free goodies, you know, sign me up for it's almost impossible to get any of those things if you don't have that kind of documentation. So it's not happening. There is nobody here who is sitting there just living in the lap of luxury on the government, being paid for by us hardworking taxpayers, but they're, you know, illegal, as they like to say. It's not possible to do that. You can't get that stuff. And the similar thing happens if you're just trying to do regular things like get loans or go to school. Like a bank's not going to give you a loan. The government is certainly not going to give you a loan. The state government here might. I believe we'd have to ask about that, but I think they've opened up some grants for undocumented people. And then there are private entities that will provide them. But most of the standard routes don't exist. And if you go to the Office of Financial Services or whatever it's called to ask for help, they don't actually know most of this stuff. So they're just like, whoop, you can't do it. Sorry, that just, you know, they're not versed in that. So it's not only is it you have to find unusual things, you have to go find the people that know this stuff in order to ask them, in order to get those things, in order to attend. So there are all these different kind of hoops that you have to jump through, that there's no obvious path that is easy to point to.
I was snooping around the U of I website a little bit, trying to see if I could pick up a little bit more information about this, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
There was absolutely
because they don't
nothing.
have it.
Absolutely nothing.
So if you're a Latino, you can go to like La Casa or something, and there are people there. You know, the different ethnic groups have their own little path for teaching people about how to do this. But in general, there is no one-stop place that you can go to get this kind of information. That's one thing that the Welcoming Center over at the Y is trying to work on, is to acquire this kind of information and make it available so anybody from anywhere who has questions can, get answers tailored to their needs. But it's a big project because there's nowhere you can't just go online and say, I'm looking for the answer. That you might get like some hits, you might get nothing, you might get who knows, and so you have to plod around and just ask everybody kind of face to face. It's complicated.
Dig around on the dark web.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The dark web. How do you get to the dark web?
I don't even know, but I'm assuming to get answers to these questions, you have to go through every single portal available.
I've heard of it, but it's like dark web. Oh, you are now.
I truly don't know.
And then the lights dim, and
not questions for a political science student.
Yeah, you probably don't want to mess around there. Your law career will be over before it starts, if that's the case. Well, we're entering the last few minutes. Lawyer, you're going to be a lawyer. That's part of your thing.
Hoping that's on the plan, on the agenda. But like I mentioned, I'm going to be taking a year or two to build some professional skills before I apply to law school.
Mm-hmm. And what do they teach you in business school anyway? I mean,
I don't think I'll be going to business school. I think I'm just going to take your average Joe regular job for a year or two. It's actually quite interesting. A lot of law schools now prefer applicants that have had work experience.
Interesting.
So I believe it makes you a stronger candidate for them, knowing that you've actually been in the workforce and kind of experienced
any kind of work, or
any kind of work, really. Yeah, it doesn't even have to be involved with law. They just prefer work experience. So I'm going to take a year or two to do that, save up some money, because law school debts are going to be great, and then hopefully pursue that and be able to do something really great with it.
That you're going to make so much money. You're going to be so rich.
I probably know. Unfortunately, the public sector law does not make that much money as your private corporate firms, but it's more about pursuing your passions and enjoying what you do every day.
Well, I'm glad that you're interested in that. It's some people are like, I want to be a veterinarian and help animals. I love to see people who have empathy and sympathy and are guided by that to want to do things to help, because too much about this culture, being U.S. culture, is about me,
right.
Money, stuff. I want to have name brand this and expensive that, and it's like that. There's nothing there, really. Honestly, this might sound like an old person just being old, but as you approach the end of your life, this sounds really corny. It's like what really matters, and it's not the stuff you have. The stuff is cool, but I've had lots of stuff, and it's come and gone. It's like, okay, whatever. It doesn't have staying power. The stuff that has staying power are the relationships you form and the feeling that you've done something positive to help. That sticks with you, and it makes you feel good. And I think that's worth pursuing. So good on you, as they say.
Thank you.
We just have a couple minutes left. I won't drag this out any longer, but I do want to tell you that you have been listening to CU Immigration here on WRFU LP Urbana 104.5 FM, or you've been watching us on UPTV. And we appreciate your tuning in. I thank you for coming on and talking.
Thank you for having me.
If you want to come on again, I know you're so busy, you probably can't, but if you do, if you think, I should have talked about, I'm
sure there's plenty we can talk about.
Yeah. But until then, one way or the other, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.